Hey, this is Chris. I just had a quick message before this episode starts. We're going to be talking about anxiety on this episode, and I wanted to be clear that the kind of anxiety that we're talking about during this episode is very similar to things like stage fright. It's situational. You have anxiety for the situation, and once that's over, it sort of goes away. That's a pretty normal part of life. If you have anxiety, but you feel like it sort of never goes away or gets in the way of what you want to be doing, we just suggest that you talk to a doctor or a therapist about it. Andy and I are both very pro mental health. We've either been in therapy or are currently in therapy or will be, and we know that into the future, and that's okay. So just no stigma here whatsoever about that. We just want to be really clear about that up front, just in case when you're listening to this, it either triggers something or you feel like, oh, well, there's something wrong going on. It's a healthy thing to talk about with your doctor. So if you feel like you need any resources, please reach out. I'm happy to find those for you, although I will let you know that it's probably better to just chat with a therapist directly. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy the episode. It legitimately fell off the tables. 7.
Chris, the topic we will be discussing tonight is one added fairly recently by Audrey Huggett. It is, how do you deal with anxiety as a game master?
Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics relating to running games. My name is Chris Salzman.
My name is Andy Rao.
And we have no guests this week. I apologize yet again for that. But yeah, it's just us two, but I think that will be fine. We'll be back after this one with some special kind of end-of-year episodes, which are going to be pretty fun. And I don't know, should we tell them what we're doing, Andy? Or do we want to just see if it actually happens?
Let's leave it a surprise.
Okay.
/ wait until we're sure it's actually going to happen. So, yeah.
I think it'll most likely happen, but we're gonna have some previous guests back on, and it'll be a fun thing that we're gonna do. So Andy, you told me before we started recording that you had a question to start us off with.
I do. I have a pair of amazing discussions to get us going here, Chris. When this episode airs, you, dear listener, should you live in the United States, will be celebrating the holiday of Thanksgiving. So I thought, Chris, it might be appropriate to have a couple of quick little Thanksgiving-related discussion questions here to kick off our episode.
Okay.
And so I have one more frivolous Thanksgiving question and one slightly more serious. It's not very much more serious, don't worry.
Okay.
So let's start out with the frivolous one here, Chris. And that is, Chris, in the spirit of thankfulness and gratitude, what is a game rule that you are grateful that somebody else came up with? And if you need a minute to think about it, I can share mine.
No, my immediate reaction to this was the advantage and disadvantage rule in D&D 5th edition, because it makes just so many situations just so much easier.
Yeah.
Because you can just say, well, that doesn't make sense, you have disadvantage, or you can say, you know what, let's see if that happens, so you can have advantage.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I was rereading some D20 Modern, which is like a 3rd edition D&D era game, and I was amazed at how many little situational modifiers you're expected to keep track of in a typical combat round, and I've just gotten spoiled with advantage, disadvantage on it. It's is it harder or is it easier? That's the only question you have to ask. Yeah, that's a good answer. Do
you have anything that you're particularly grateful for, mechanically wise?
I do. The reason I was reading D20 Modern was to just check that I remembered this rule correctly, because I was introduced in D20 Modern to a rule that I'm sure predated D20 Modern, but this is where I encountered it, and that is the idea of having an abstract wealth / money system. So instead of keeping track of your 4,922 gold pieces and how many silver pieces and your monthly income and your monthly expenses, you just have a wealth bonus on your character sheet. And if you want to buy something, it just has a difficulty class. If it's expensive or hard to find, it's you have to roll 18, and you just roll and add your wealth bonus. I've seen it implemented in various ways. I'm describing the D20 implementation of it. I've seen it implemented in other ways, but man, it is so much more elegant to just abstract wealth and treasure and stuff like that than to expect everybody to keep track of their loot and their income and expenses. And in the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's like all these rules of like, if you're running a tavern, like what's your income and what are your expenses, and it's like, who has time for this?
So it's the concept is that like, basically whenever you're trying to buy something or you need to spend money, you're actually making a roll rather than depleting kind of a spreadsheet that you've written down.
Exactly. And the idea is you can certainly think of cases where it would produce unrealistic situations, but in general it works really well because it can represent the fact that you have maybe a suitcase full of $100 bills, but it can also represent the fact that you're just kind of a wealthy person who can draw on connections and credit and liquidate assets or whatever as needed. So it's just like a flexible way to handle it.
Yeah, like something that I'm running into a little bit with the campaign I'm doing is like I haven't yet really given them a lot of reasons to spend all the money they keep finding.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like thinking about that, it's just like, well, I want to keep on giving them, cool treasure and stuff, but at the same time, it's like, well, what are they going to use it for? And so trying to think through some of that as in a long-term game is very complex. And it'd be great if it was just like, well, what do you need? Okay, you kind of have like a lot of money, so let's just, you can have it or you can roll. That's a good rule. Yeah.
I've gone on too long about it. I apologize, but I've been bottling that up for like decades.
Yeah. Finally, you have your platform to talk about it.
Yeah. So my other question, Chris, is very related. Also in the spirit of gratitude, what is something that your players have done or can do for you at the table that you are grateful for? I can start on this one. I am just grateful when players show up having put some thought into the game in between game sessions. Because I get that is a tough ask sometimes because we're all really busy. I don't need anyone to memorize the rule books or even purchase the rule books, that sort of thing. But I love it when characters show up and they're like, I've been thinking about my character, or I've been thinking about what I want to do. And I don't know, that always just gives me a little thrill of satisfaction and gratitude to the player.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think more and more I'm just grateful when players throw me off a little bit, right?
Yep.
Like, yeah, it's pretty easy for me to feel like I can sit down and sort of guide the session or feel like I have some sort of control over it. And I love it when players do stuff where it's like, well, I didn't think about that, and now we're going to have to figure it out together. That's part of the magic of gaming, right? Like, it's not just that you have forced these players sort of through whatever homebrew idea of a story that you have. It's like that you're sort of building it together. So I'm pretty grateful for that, actually. Yeah, that there's people that are willing to sit down and sort of do that with me from week to week.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, wherever you are and whenever you're listening to this, we hope that you are playing with people that you are grateful to be playing with.
Yes. And if you're not, stop playing with them.
What are you doing? What are you doing, man?
Yeah.
Go see a movie.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So happy Thanksgiving. This will be relevant one day out of each year. So
yeah, you are really you're putting some time pressure on people listening to this episode. Well, we're sort of beating around the bush, I think, because we're probably a little anxious about the question itself about how do you deal with anxiety as a game master. And when Audrey brought up this question back in episode 21, I immediately was like, that is the best question, and we should probably just ask that one over and over to every guest who comes on. At least my experience talking with other GMs, especially on this podcast, we get to do that quite a bit, is that almost all of them bring some amount of deep-seated anxiety to the table every time that they're playing, or especially at the beginning of a campaign. So it seems like a pretty relevant question, I guess. So I should ask you, Andy. I definitely experience anxiety running games. Do you still experience anxiety? I mean, you've been playing games for decades.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge problem. I mean, honestly, it's probably the biggest problem, of all these different challenging questions we've posed on this podcast over the last year.
Yeah.
I'm amazed it's taken us this long to get to the question of the anxiety thing, because it's a big deal. It was a big deal when I was playing in high school, and it's still a big deal even though I'm a grown adult. Yeah. How about you? So you said this is a thing for you. So how does that anxiety manifest for you? So you have a game coming up in a week. what happens?
It usually manifests with a lot of procrastination, right? Like this is just, it's classic coping mechanisms from high school and college and stuff, right? It's like you push everything off into the last possible minute and then kind of find excuses that you can kind of blame your non-preparation on, right? Like it's like, oh, well, I ran out of time, or, you know, something else happened, so I didn't have as much time as I wanted to. So I think that's sort of a big way that it plays in for me. But then there's also sort of this element of like over preparation too, where it's like, if I just prepare enough, then I won't be anxious, right? Because I've thought of every eventuality. That's yet to actually turn out, because it's like, that's again the point of these games, is you don't know exactly what's going to happen when you're sitting down. Yeah. It's sort of an odd thing to me. It's like the anxiety of it is similar to stage fright, if you've ever experienced that, right? Public speaking, those sorts of things, where you're standing up in front of someone and having to speak to them, and the tension is sort of on you. In a way, like this hobby is you're forcing yourself into that situation over and over again, where, you know, it's an optional activity, right? But you're still doing it. And there's something good about that, right? Like you learn a little bit about yourself when you open up your mouth and start speaking and do these, you know, do preparation and try to interact with people around the table. So I think it's like, it's a fruitful thing, but that doesn't mean that it's not the easiest thing. It'd be a lot more, you know, a lot easier to just go, you know, watch a movie like we were joking about before, rather than to sit down in front of someone and, you know, in front of a group and try to create something together.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. Yeah, and if in any past discussions on this podcast, I've made it sound like I prepare really well in advance, like that's a huge doubt. I was lying, you know, or I should say that is aspirational.
Yes.
I mean, I remember in high school, I mean, all the way back to my first days playing games, just this strange experience of loving something and having it be the source of so much stress. Like, just it felt sometimes just like a disproportionate amount of stress. So much that I remember sometimes, you know, getting together with my friends and we'd be all ready to play, and I would be just deliberately dragging things out before the game started because I was just saying you're nervous about it, or just that it's stage fright, I feel doesn't quite hit at what it is. It's just a sort of a strange, just an anxiety about this activity you're about to plunge into. What causes that anxiety, if you were to take a few guesses? Is it that people won't have fun? Is it something different? I mean, I guess if we knew the answer to this question, we could just solve the problem, and then would be that, right? So what are some of the things that create anxiety in you?
To me, it's sort of it's the unknown, but what you said there, that people might not have fun, where it's, you know, it's supposed to be a fun activity that you're doing, which is also just like, it's such a weird idea, because again, if people weren't having fun, they wouldn't show up. Right. Like it's sort of that classic, like, well, I mean, no one actually wants to be hanging out with me, like that sort of mentality. It's like, well, no, I mean, they wouldn't be there unless they wanted to be. But I think it's an important thing to talk about. Yeah, too, because it is this weird thing where it's every game master has sort of their own little steps of anxiety that they go through. For me, it's sort of like, as soon as I start playing, right, it goes away somewhat, until there's a situation where it's like I've run out of the material that I had prepared, or, you know, whatever. Then it's like, oh no, like, what are we going to do? It's like, well, we're going to continue to do what we were doing, which is having fun playing a game together, right? And it'll be okay. So I don't know if that even answers your question, really. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. And I think so the question is about, you know, how do you deal with anxiety? And I think for me, the way I deal with it is like, you know, after those first couple times where it's just like, you feel like you're throwing yourself off of a cliff, you know, and just hoping that it's going to work, you realize that, like, well, okay, all you really need to do, you need to take the step, and then the rest of the night's fun, or, you know, the rest of the session is fun from there, and like the anxiety sort of goes away or lessens. I think we should hasten to say, like, right, there's a difference between sort of the anxiety we're talking about, which I think is just sort of like general social anxiety, and like an actual thing you should go see a therapist for.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And so I think, like, knowing that distinction is probably going to be up to you and your therapist to sort of figure out. But yeah, I think the anxiety we're talking about really is just sort of like, you know, something you can sort of get over without the aid of, you know, medicine or a medical professional.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, please interpret anything dumb that we say with that in mind. Yeah. You know, we're not casting judgment on anybody's, you know, medical situation or anything like that. We're just purely talking about this sort of stage fright that a lot of game masters feel. Yeah. And that, you know, with some work, hopefully you can at least reduce or get a handle on.
A question that I had that's sort of related to this, that I've been thinking about a lot actually lately is like, most of us who play tabletop RPGs also play board games. It's a very similar idea. Like you're sitting around a table with a bunch of people and playing a game. Do you find that when you're playing board games, especially if it's a game that you're having to teach everybody and sort of run right a little bit like they don't know the rules, do you have that same sort of anxiety that you have running a tabletop?
I do, but it's much less. Okay. It's just my personality is such that if I'm hosting a game, I feel whether it's a board game or a video game or a role-playing game, I do feel responsibility for other people's fun. And that's maybe dumb of me to think, but that's just baked into my psyche, and I can't get rid of it. It is much less on a board game, and with a board game, everybody shares a joint responsibility for keeping things running in a way that isn't always true. It isn't always the case in a role-playing game. In a well-run, well-played role-playing game, everybody is contributing to the fun, and everybody is bearing a little bit of that load of expectation of making the experience fun. In a board game, that's kind of mandatory. In a role-playing game, it is possible for someone to check out if they're bored or they are not having fun or whatever, and it is possible in a role-playing game for somebody to be carrying most of the weight, and that can be the game master, and I don't feel the anxiety nearly as much with a board game, but it's there.
Yeah, I don't think I do either. And I think, again, probably speaking for everybody who's listening to this podcast, like the people who are listening to this podcast are probably the ones who end up explaining board games when you're playing, right?
Yeah.
Like you are the one who pulls out the rules and actually reads through it and then finds a way to synthesize it and share it with the group. And like that's very much a role at the table when you're playing a board game. Like there are certain people who will just never crack the rule book. Right, but they want to play the game, but they're not going to be the one that's going to sit down and sort of try to explain it to everybody, either because they're not good at doing that sort of thing, or it's just, like it doesn't even occur to them that they could be that person.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, that was honestly sort of the gateway to being a GM, was playing board games and realizing that every time we're playing, like, oh, I'm the one that's sort of like managing the, like, everybody understanding what's going on, with the board game and like, how to play and, basic strategies and stuff like that. Yeah. So, I mean, that's maybe just an ego trip thing, but yeah, it's, I think there's a lot of kind of corollaries there, but there's just like a lot of less anxiety for whatever reason.
Well, one thing that has happened in role-playing games in the last decade or so that has been a positive movement, I think, for GMs that do feel anxious about running games. There are a lot of great games out there that bake into the rules more player activity, I guess, than it used to be in the old days. Running, say, Blades of the Dark or Fate or Dungeon World or whatever, it's perfectly appropriate and expected that the players are picking up a lot of the creative, on-the-fly, coming up with details that the GM used to be solely saddled with. I do think that if this is an issue for you as a GM, there are a lot of great games that maybe can like help by easing that load. If the source of your anxiety is, I'm having a really hard time, coming up with all this stuff.
Yeah, I wonder part of it relates back to like how you treat sort of the role as a GM, right? So if you treat it like the person that is responsible for the fun or is sort of like the god of the universe that you're creating, right, that puts a lot of pressure on the GM to have that much control over what's going on. And I think that's right, like, so like you were mentioning sort of these newer style games where there is a little bit more control sort of spread out around the table. It eases the burden on one person to have sort of control of everything by making it a more collaborative environment. And then I think, also drops anxiety down quite a bit. I was talking with Kyle Latino, a previous guest, yesterday, and he mentioned that a lot of these games are sort of coming out of like queer creators more lately. And you find that a bunch of the language and sort of the rule sets are based around like consent language. And so it's a lot of like yes-anding and making sure everybody at the table is comfortable and like everybody at the table is participating, things like that. And I thought that was just a really, I mean, I'm sure he's not the first one to make that observation. But yeah, I thought it was a really good observation because like, it's a very different way of playing a role-playing game that I think if you handed that to Gygax, he probably would have been like, you're going to do what now? Like,
yeah.
Well, I mean, we have this amazing rule set and like, you're going to throw away all those rules and just sort of imagine together. Like, I mean, he might've gotten it, but it wouldn't have been the vision of D&D.
I know exactly what you mean, and I think that is an argument for always greater inclusion in this hobby, because new perspectives bring kind of fresh takes on some of these age-old challenges and problems.
I wanted to bring up something that is coming up in my life. Is I'm going to be playing a murder mystery in the early part of 2020. And so it's like a written adventure module. Murder mystery, I guess, is the only way that I can think about it in terms that we all might understand.
Yeah.
But there's like all these characters written up. There's sort of like a story. There's like lines given to people that they can read. And the thought is you get together with your friends and you like act out this murder mystery.
Sure.
And then there's like an envelope, right, that you can seal and kind of open up at the end to figure out, like, you know, who done it. But there's one character in it who's sort of supposed to act as like the detective character. And so, of course, right, if I'm going to be playing this, I'm going to be playing that detective character, right? Not just one of the guests. So I'm having this very interesting set of new anxieties thinking about that. Because all of a sudden it's like, it's almost a LARP. It's almost theater. You know, it's a very different thing. Like, you're going to be standing up, moving around. There's no dice rolling, right? There's nothing to really fall back on. Yeah. You're not going to have a screen, anything like that. But yeah, but it's still running a game, right? Like, you're still sort of doing the same thing. Like, there's information you're hiding and you're bringing people together, helping them think about stuff and things like that. So I don't know. Have you ever done anything like this before? Have you ever done any LARPs or murder mysteries, stuff like this?
You know, not really. I've done a few things that are maybe tangential to them, but I've never done a murder mystery. I've never done
really?
How to host a murder thing. I know it's kind of a weird thing, and I think about running or hosting one of these things on a regular basis. I just haven't got around to it. But and LARPing has never just really been my thing. I'm interested in it kind of in the abstract, and I love hearing. I know a lot of people that LARP, and I think it's pretty fantastic, but I don't know. Just not a thing for me. So I guess that's one less source of anxiety for me.
Yeah, I think what I'm thinking through, it's like it's just very interesting. I mean, I think if I hadn't been playing, you know, D&D and stuff, the prospect of this would just be sort of horrifying in a way.
Yes.
But instead, the prospect of like not being the person sort of like running as the detective was horrifying, right? Like, I didn't want to just be like, someone participating, which again is something I should probably think through with a therapist. But
thinking about how things that you can do to reduce your GMing anxiety. So what are some of those things that you do? So here's a simple example. Does just spending more time preparing your adventure noticeably reduce your anxiety as a GM?
No. Does it for you?
Maybe a bit.
Okay.
It doesn't magically remove the anxiety, but when I'm reasonably confident that I know enough about what's going on in the adventure that I'll be able to wing it, like that does take a lot of the load of anxiety off of me. I guess my kind of nightmare scenario would be showing up as a GM, being expected to run a published adventure and hardly having reviewed it at all in advance. Like, it would be better to just make up an adventure on the fly than to be in that situation. So so for me, it does help. And so one of the just practical ways I address anxiety is I just force myself to not procrastinate on the game prep. So for me, that means a week before game time, I have to be spending time getting ready for the game, like reviewing it, writing down stats, writing down info, that sort of thing. If I can put a little bit of time in each night for a week, that's like an ideal situation for me. Then that really is a big confidence booster for me. How about you? So you said it doesn't really help to do a lot of extra prep. Explain that.
That's fair to ask for more follow-up than my one-word answer. I think okay, so you said something in there, like if you have the adventure, the module memorized sort of enough to where you can almost just treat it like you're winging it, right? Because you just have it sort of embedded in your brain. That if I can do that, like there's a couple of things that I have sort of in my mind that you could ask me to run it for anybody, like at any time, and I could just go and it'd be great and be super fun. Right. Like, so that's cool to have that. It's really hard to get to that point for me. So doing any amount of prep just sort of increases the number of questions that I have about what might happen. If I'm looking at that and it's like, well, what if they go this way? And what if they go that way? I'm like, I need to kind of get all this information, you know, put together. And I just frankly don't have time to kind of go through every eventuality. Right. And like, I've been doing this long enough to know that I won't be able to go over every eventuality as well. So like the preparation part of it helps to a certain degree, but all of my anxiety is not wrapped up in like the preparation part of it. It's all sort of in the session itself.
Is it sort of a performative anxiety?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So if it is more about the actual act of performing as a GM, so are there some like tricks and tips, some life hacks you can share with us of like how you deal with that?
Yeah, the main one that I've been thinking about as we've been talking is having a pretty good idea of the structure of the session is super helpful to me. So knowing that we are going to start at a certain time, like I'm going to arrive at a certain time, it's going to end at a certain time. Yep. Those sorts of things, like the things that I can like that we sort of know we can control in some way, right? So it's like I know that like there's a time limit on it, you know, and that we're going to do, you know, a certain thing kind of right at the beginning, and like at a certain point I'm going to have to wrap it up is helpful.
Yeah.
I also, with all of my sessions, I've read competing views on this. I always do the recap as a series of questions to the table. So like we recap together. So rather than me saying like, hey, this is what happened, they kind of tell me, you know, and tell the table what has happened. And that's helpful for me to sort of like settle into the mindset. So I'm not like hitting the ground running with some sort of speech about what happened last time.
Yeah.
It's also a good reminder to me that it's like, it's not just something that I get to kind of just tell them, right? They can tell me. And then if there's something that's like wrong or like we all disagree on it, then we can either decide what the truth is or correct each other. So that's helpful. What about you? Do you have tips and tricks that you go through for?
Nothing amazing, but something you said really rang true with me. Thinking about the structure of a game, one thing I have found really helpful in the last couple of years is just to, when it's time to start the game, just like jump into the game. Just start the game. Like try and cut out that like nebulous pre-game. You're sort of playing, you're recapping the last adventure, you're talking about what people are purchasing. You know, you're going through just a lot of sort of gamey stuff, but you haven't started the game. See if you can, like for me, I have started just cutting that stuff out because that's like a just nervousness incubator period of time for me as a GM. You know, because I'm just waiting like, oh, is it time to start the game yet? Oh, I don't know. For me, I just sit there being nervous while everybody's going through the shopping lists and stuff like that. I much prefer to just like jump in, keep the recap quick and sharp, or use a strategy like you just described for the recap. And when it's game time, just start gaming. And then like the flip side of that is, like you said, have an end time so that you know when you're going to end. Everybody knows when it's going to end. That takes away the stress of trying to gauge like, oh, is it time to quit? Is this the best time to stop? That sort of thing. Just treat it like you would like a board game. Man, we start at 8 and we end at 10. You know, that works for a board game. Do it for tabletop RPG too.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. Have you done any reading into sort of like improv or public speaking type of topics that have helped you at all as a GM?
Not really, and it's something that I want to, because I think there is a lot that improv can teach sort of game tables about just how to approach a conversation, right? So I mean, like the classic sort of yes and thing from improv, I do think is super helpful. Like, so I've never really read too much about it other than sort of seeing, honestly, like YouTube videos about, how to do it. Oh my goodness. I just remembered I did take one improv class back when I was 18 or 18, I think. Yeah, it was a very weird situation. I like ended up going to something that I thought was going to be like a theater performance and ended up being an improv class. I thought about this in a little bit. Yeah, and it was wild. I was not ready for it. Yeah, because they played lots of like improv-y games and stuff, and like I mostly held out in the back as much as possible because I wanted to melt into a puddle of embarrassment.
Yes.
Not to say that like I think now it'd be fun, but at 18 it was just deeply terrifying to be in that situation. Anyway, but yeah, back to your question. I think that would be helpful, right? Like from everything that I've heard and read and seen from improv actors, it seems like a very cool environment in that everybody sort of has each other's back, right? Like they all sort of understand that they're in it together, and it's not just one person who's going to go up and monologue and just be the star of the show. Have you read much about it? Or?
I've not. It's also on my to-do list. I know there are a couple of well-regarded books on this topic. Like I think there's a book called like Improv for Gamers or GMs or something like that out there. I'd love to check that out at some point. I just haven't got around to it, I suppose.
I've thought about taking some sort of theater class or public speaking thing with the express purpose of getting better at GMing. I think that'd be a fun conversation to have with whoever's running the class too. It's like, well, I'm here because.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
One thing that I try to do that helps a little bit is just to think about what it's like when I am a player. And I don't know about you, but when I am a player, I actually do not expect that the GM is going to create all of my fun for me. And I think it is easy to assume as the GM that, like, oh, if I don't do a great job, like, no one will have fun. But I don't think that's how most players are coming into your game. It is possible to put pressure on yourself that literally nobody else at the table is putting on you.
Yeah, I mean, we close every episode of this with that like cheesy tagline. Remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM. And it's like, well, yeah, like I should probably write that on my GM screen, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, just in big bold letters. It's like that's probably the most important rule.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we should wrap it up. This was super interesting. Audrey, if you're listening, thanks for adding this to the table. And yeah, this might have to be a returning question.
I was just going to say that I would love to broach this again with some of our amazing guests because, not to bag on you, Chris, or on me, but
yeah,
I have a feeling there's a lot of great insight we could get from just talking to other GMs as well. Yeah. So if you are listening to this and GM anxiety is a thing for you, please, like, tell us how to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll also have an advice column. So if you want to send in your questions about exactly what's going wrong. Yeah. No, but yeah, we would love to hear. I think it's super fun. Yeah, we don't really like talk too much about this, but I think like it's always fun for us to hear people's reactions to episodes and sort of what they thought about it and at what points they were screaming into their podcast player. Their iPod, right? Yeah, like, what are you talking about? Yeah, so do reach out. Yeah, I think maybe 2020 will be the year where all we talk about is anxiety indoors. Just go back and forth between those two topics. Let's see. I wanted one sort of wrap-up question, right? Because we don't, right, we don't have a guest, so we don't have anything else to sort of other talk about. I wanted to ask sort of our classic question about, like, what sort of media have you been consuming lately that has been like sparking sort of gaming thoughts for you?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I can start. I watched Hotel Artemis yesterday. Have you heard of this movie?
No, I have not.
It kind of like came and went. It's this. I was not aware of this. It's sort of like a sci-fi, like near future movie about this hotel in California during some riots. I think it's like a LA riots in like 2038 or something like that. This hotel that is set up just to like fix up criminals, right? So like, and everybody has to sort of have membership. So it reminds me a lot of John Wick, honestly. Like I feel like there's a lot of parallels there, but like, so you have a membership to the hotel. So whenever you get like a bullet wound or something like that, you can go to this hotel and there's a nurse there who can take care of you. Get you fixed up and stuff. So the movie is set on like kind of one really bad night at that hotel where 3 or 4 stories sort of collide all at once. But yeah, it's super stylistic. The cast is really fun. But yeah, it had me, of course, thinking about like that setting is really fun. Like this exclusive, hotel for criminals where they can go and get, get healed when they have gunshot wounds. And things like that. The movie itself was fine. It was enjoyable. If you like movies that are sort of based around like, let's get a bunch of charismatic actors together and let them play sort of weird characters, which I love movies like that. So so it's totally up my alley. Yeah. So like other movies like that, there is Knives Out is coming out pretty soon. That's a similar, I feel like, style.
I've got my eye on that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just like you get a bunch of sort of famous people doing like weird characters together. It's going to be a fun time. Yeah, so that's like a lukewarm recommendation for Hotel Artemis. But I think if you like games and sort of thinking through like how a scenario might go down, I think it's worthwhile watching.
As for me, I've got, I guess, 2 things spring to mind. One is a video game thing because I'm a video game nerd, like you, Chris.
Yeah.
And I have been playing a game called Ion Fury. It is a retro FPS first-person shooter built in the game engine that powered like Duke Nukem 3D and a couple of other games back in the mid-late 90s. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know for sure, but I think a couple of the like Duke Nukem 3D designers are behind it.
Okay.
Anyway, so it's a throwback, it's a nostalgic game, but it just playing through it just has a very Dungeons and Dragons-y feel to the design of the levels. There was this era in like shooters, and I'll try not to go too deep into the weeds of video game history here, but
I'm here for
there's sort
this.
of an era of shooters where the environments were just amazing. And it was in like the mid-late 90s where I feel like there's this peak of just amazing levels in these games that were open and non-linear and full of interesting, different interconnected areas. Not too long after like the 90s, video games and video game shooters started getting more linear. So you didn't have a lot of choice about like which way to go. And I'm not saying that's a bad choice because some amazing games came out of that, but these old Doom and Duke Nukem 3D, and in this case Ion Fury levels, they're these sprawling levels. You're expected to backtrack repeatedly through the levels as you explore it and as you run into dead ends. And in almost every level, there's like a point where you're just kind of not sure where to go. So you're exploring, you're revisiting stuff that you maybe raced past initially, looking for details you missed. And every now and then the game will drop new enemies or encounters into an area that you had thought you had cleared. And I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it just I find it very inspirational as a GM to think about dungeon levels, not as like an obstacle course that the PCs need to get through, but as kind of a big, interesting, open area that players are invited to just explore at their pace. And that only works for some kinds of Dungeons and Dragons games. But if you haven't done that, take a look at your dungeon design and ask yourself, can the PCs just explore around and get lost in this? Or is there an obvious path for them to choose? And, I don't know, maybe consider leaning into that openness and choice of navigation. So, okay, that was my really long-winded thing.
No,
the other
really
thing
cool.
I'll be more brief about, I somewhat anxiously read a manga. I say manga, and my 12-year-old daughter gripes at me that it's actually manga, Dad. I read a horror manga by Junji Ito, who I guess is considered one of the great horror manga artists. I read Uzumaki is the name of it, and if you are feeling a little bored with Lovecraft, this was a good read for me because I love H.P. Lovecraft. I love Call of Cthulhu. But, Cthulhu is in everything these days, and there's a lot of overexposure of the Cthulhu mythos going on.
Yeah.
And I thought Uzumaki was a pretty evocative and successful attempt to poke at some of those Lovecraftian ideas and themes, but without falling back on, the actual Lovecraftian mythos and imagery. So I recommend it with caution because it's horror and it's, it's definitely an R-rated sort of situation. But if that's your bag and you're kind of bored with Cthulhu, I don't know, Junji Ito, I'm sure he's published a lot of stuff. So I don't know, check him out.
Is it in a compendium? Or is it ongoing? Or?
I got a collected like omnibus edition that I think collects it from beginning to end. Okay. I don't think that it is ongoing.
Cool.
So recommended with that, yellow flag of caution if that's not your
nice bag. Christmas read.
Yeah. My daughter, I am not recommending it to my daughter. She was disappointed, but I was like, I don't know. If you want to like sneak behind my back and read this, that's probably a pretty typical teenagery thing for you to do, and that'd probably be fine, but I can't in good conscience recommend that you read this. Yeah, just don't tell me. Just be freaked out on your own. Don't tell me.
Well, we should add a topic to the table. And I have an idea unless you have something.
Well, you having an idea is more than I have, so let's hear it.
Perfect. Something I've been thinking about quite a bit lately is how do you make travel from point A to point B interesting?
Ooh, yes. Oh, this came up in like the Discord.
Yeah, I think I brought it up because I had a couple of sessions of travel that were just like not working, and it's totally my fault. So this is a self-serving topic. I want to just hear how other people actually handle this.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's a super practical one, and I would love to jump into that, but we'll have to wait for a future episode.
Yeah.
and the roll of the die.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody who has listened. Again, we just appreciate it a lot. Like, yeah, you have a billion other podcasts you could be listening to, so it's just huge that you spent any amount of time with us. Yes, we appreciate it. And as always, if you have someone that you feel like should be on this podcast, please shoot us a message and I will go bother them directly to get them on the podcast. We're always looking for new guests. But yeah, I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
And remember, if your players are having fun, you're a great GM.